our SIR Studios Inside the Issue. Today's guest is Alex Carolan, whose story Intrauterine is featured in the spring 2025 issue of Southern Indiana Review. Alex Carolan is a writer based in Baltimore with an MFA from the University of New Hampshire. Her work appears or is forthcoming in The Pinch and in Cimarron Review. Alex, welcome to Inside the Issue.
Thanks, Casey.
So, would you mind reading from Intrauterine for us?
Yeah, that'd be great.
All right, thanks.
I crouched over the toilet, backgrounded like a creature gone feral. There was something primal about it all, my fingers searching to identify the foreign object that did not belong inside me. Where is it anyway, Gina? Annie asked from outside of the bathroom door, where she was seated and waiting for me to exit. The uterus, womb, do we have wombs before we're pregnant? Annie and I like to ask one another dumb questions. There was no reason to act like we knew more than we did. Recently, she had been talking about my fertility more than my grandmother. The installation was birth-like, I said. Did they dilate you? She asked. I wanted to be more like Annie, uninhibited and capable of everything. No, but I think I had contractions, I said. Describe them to me. It was the worst cramping I've ever experienced, and I couldn't help but think, is this what the beginning of childbirth is like? I told Ian about my fear, that my newly installed IUD had become dislodged in the grocery store earlier that day, blurting it out as he considered a box of arugula versus a new kind of lettuce called spice. But that's highly unlikely, he said, weighing the greens in each hand. He was right. Sometimes I wondered if I told him things out of spite. A part of me wanted him to worry about my health, to think that something I had gotten specifically for him could endanger me. It was like I was testing him. Would he end it because of my antics? Aside from the pain, that's another reason I couldn't get an IUD, Annie said. She was leaning against the door, clacking her rings against the wood. I'd want to have a baby the second it was inside me, even though I think it's cruel to bring a child into this world. It's too close to the birth canal. I'd want to get pregnant to defy it. It's hot. Annie liked to push boundaries, but she would never get an IUD. She was too scared. She admitted it. I felt like I was one of the select few of a certain club, the IUD club. The same feeling as when you have sex for the first time and feel like you're finally a part of something. It was like I was starting to understand motherhood and Annie was miles away. I imagined the T-shaped plastic floating inside me, poking and prodding where it wasn't supposed to. It wasn't unlike having a baby. I was crampy, bloated, and peeing constantly. Did it grow in strength each time it defended my body against Ian's sperm? It's like my body thinks I'm having a child, I said. There was a thrill that went along with it, to think that I was capable of something that was so taboo. Your IUD baby, Annie said. What will you name her? She is definitely a girl. I think I will name her Leela, because I like how the letters roll off of one another and because my great-grandmother's name was Lillian, and she deserves to be recognized. She had a hard life. Little Leela, she said. Auntie Annie. What would Ian think? He would get too excited, I said. This wasn't something I would share with Ian. I had gotten the IUD to avoid broaching the subject of motherhood, and so the device should have made my ability to procreate a non-factor. Instead, it felt as though my IUD was acknowledging my fertility, as if my uterine lining was fighting against my attempts to suppress my reproductive organs with each stomach-clenching cramp. The IUD outed me as someone who could bear a child, something I feared Ian found sexy. He hadn't been secretive about his want for children. It was something he hinted at often, and which I chose to ignore. Who wants to think about these things when you're in your 20s? We're all better off going out to explore the world, visiting the market down the block to purchase a $14 arugula and brie sandwich on a whim. On Annie's toilet, I couldn't bear to talk with her about the not baby inside me. It was an intrauterine device. It was a little robot smacking away sperm. It was a fucked up thing to think about, this thing at work inside my body. But I did not tell Annie this. She cooed gently outside of the door. An IUD baby. Isn't that sweet?
All right, thanks. Where did this story come from? What was its genesis?
Yeah, I think that I think being in your 20s, I think is when you start to think about these more serious subjects of like motherhood and parenthood and like I think it's when you start to see the friends around you or maybe friends you've had in the past kind of go down these surprising paths or paths unlike your own. And I think it's starting to sort of question one's identity. So, um, at the time when I was thinking about this story, I'd recently moved up to New Hampshire for my MFA program. I was going through a lot of life changes and was just thinking about like being a real adult and what that meant and motherhood and all of those sorts of things. And had a lot of friends in my 30s who were starting to think about, or their 30s who were starting to think about those sorts of things. And then I was just also thinking about IUDs as a subject, just like it's common contraception. A lot of people I know have them, and it's just like I feel like it gained a lot of momentum at the time because people have talked about how painful it is to get them installed. Like it's a very like people say there should be anesthesia. I think it's different for every person, but it is kind of like this almost extreme thing that you do to your body. I mean, it's not really extreme, it's commonplace, it's really safe and it's really effective. But to sort of not have this thing of like motherhood approach, like not to experience that and what have you. I'm kind of rambling a little, but yeah, so I think I was thinking about a lot of those things and this character I think was in a place where she wasn't really sure what she wanted, but it seems like the other people around her are more sure about what they want. And I think that sort of freaked her out. And so I think the IUD is sort of this physical manifestation of this sort of freak out, if you will. So yeah, I don't know. Does that make sense? I think it was
Yeah.
just sort of all of those confusing feelings one gets as you start to think about like the trajectory of your life almost in relationships.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm sure, the cultural climate had probably something to do with it too, with, women's reproductive rights being challenged all over. And I mean, I know that I don't know the time period you're specifically talking about, but I remember when Roe v. Wade was overturned and all that, like seemed to be a spike in them because women were like, well, they're good for a certain amount of number of, 7 years or something. So it's like, do this now because who knows what may be coming. Yeah, I mean, that's interesting. What I thought was interesting too about this, Gina's in this relationship that in every other way seems like great, right? She has this guy that's like, stereotypically what a woman wants, right? Heterosexual woman wants, but yet I like the complication of that. Like just because he is everything that she's told she should want doesn't mean that she wants it. I just really like the complication there and the tension between, this character, probably having things that other people might envy her for, but that doesn't mean that's exactly what she wants, which I think is just really cool. Um,
Yeah.
so how was the process of this story, the writing process? Was it similar to your writing process of most stories, or was it different, or does your process always varied?
Yeah, I think for this one, well, when I started writing it, I was thinking a lot about friendships and sort of what you were saying too, like in terms of like everything seeming great. And I think this character really comes from a place where like she has her mother, like it's sort of everyone's upholding these values and she's starting to question whether she wants these values. And so in terms of the writing process, I originally the story was called IUD Baby, but then I felt like a lot of things were titled with the word baby. So it ended up going in the revision process ended up being named Intrauterine instead. But yeah, so I started off with this idea of like someone getting an IUD and being freaked out because her friend jokes that it's like she's pregnant with a baby and having this IUD be like a literal baby that you think about all the time, um, and things like that. So that was sort of where I began with it. It underwent a good amount of revision. Initially, like I brought in like some life events I had been through, such as like at the time I had moved from DC to New Hampshire, and that was really big for me. So the friend in this was a friend she was on the phone with a lot. So the friend wasn't physically present at first. And the friend was in a relationship too. So there was like this comparative aspect between the two relationships that just felt like it ended up being a little busy. And I was like kind of like thinking about how the friend could get up to New Hampshire and it just sounded, or not New Hampshire, wherever she was, like it sounded kind of complicated to like try and make a character come and visit. So I was just like, I'll just put them together in the same place and that made it a lot easier. So that's sort of yeah, a little bit about like how it came about. But I think you're right in that the climate at the time also kind of like I think I was thinking a lot about women's reproductive rights and even like I think like even yeah, I think it's just like getting an IUD is kind of this horrifying thing in a way. In that like, and I think it's like safe and normal. And usually I don't talk about contraception as much, but like it is like this sort of intense thing to have this little guy put in your body just for like, whatever purposes. So I'm rambling a little bit. Did that sort of answer your
Yeah,
question?
I think it's another thing that's so interesting, and it comes up in the story too, that and you've mentioned that it is incredibly common, and the controversial in the sense of um how painful it is, but it's widely used, very successful, or good at what it preventing pregnancy, but like it's also this incredibly intimate thing, right?
Mhm.
Both in the sense of like, because it has to do with a sexual relationship and all of that, but also it's like literally being inside someone's body. It's a foreign
Yeah.
object. And it's so there's this tension between it being really super common, but also kind of strange to talk about because
Yeah.
it's so intimate. And that, I think there's the tension in there. And I think the character Gina, kind of there are moments in the story where it's clear that she's sort of wrestling with this, like, now that I have an IUD, everybody knows, right?
Yeah.
It's just this kind of, I don't know. I think that's a really just an interesting tension in this story about how something that's really common, but also something really intimate at the same time.
Yeah.
Um,
I think that's interesting. I think that's definitely something I wanted to hit on was like sort of the creepiness of it. Like it's sort of creepy that like in the story, I think it's just that like everyone knows she has this thing and then like it's literally talked about because she's having this pseudo baby shower, which is horrifying for
yeah,
her. And I think it's like sort of like, yeah, you're right. Like it is this normal, completely like every day, so many people have them, but for her, like it's this very invasive, like disturbing kind of way in which like her family and friends like she can't even think about telling her mother because she'd freak out and I think the character also has this way of like okay if she told her mom she had an IUD like would her mom kind of jump to pregnancy and like naming a child like perhaps not but in her head it's like all extremely heightened and I think it's just bringing up every possible fear she could have about like commitment and yeah, it's just creepy for, her having all these, even her best friend to talk about it so much. And I feel like it's almost that thing that families do, grandmothers do of like talking about, your fertility. It's weird. It's weird that fertility is talked about so much. And I think that was kind of what I wanted to get at too in
yeah.
this.
And I mean, I think that all that pressure that many young women feel is very much present in the story. You mentioned the sort of like fake baby shower scene. Where did that? Because that's a moment where the story almost doesn't. I don't think it does, but almost tips into like absurdity, right? Because it's just such a strange thing. So how did you navigate that scene where I would argue it's just this side of the line of absurd, and I think successfully. But how did you navigate that where did that idea come from? This idea that a friend would think it would be funny to throw a not baby shower for a friend who has an IUD implanted.
Yeah, I mean, I think Annie and this is kind of a shitty friend. And I think that the Gina is sort of coming to terms with that and like really wants to keep going through the process of being friends with this person, but that Annie kind of becomes increasingly carried away with it. Yeah, I that's interesting that you say that about the absurd aspect because I did really want to toe that line of this kind of still feeling real and it's just I think again it's just this friend is clearly not hearing Gina sort of over and over even in the beginning with the first joke like she's like haha IUD baby and then she's like oh my God no and then she gets like the card with the creepy chicken nugget on it from her friend too and it just like kind of all comes to a head there and yeah I wanted something I guess I mean, I don't know how, like, this friend just clearly is so dense and really not listening to Gina. And I feel like Gina has a trouble with, like, approaching her friend about that and even wanting to broach the conflict because I think she has this way of sort of dismissing it all and just like just getting by and being like everything will be okay and this will all be fine and like I can do these things and I don't know get married and all this stuff that seems really scary to her because of this IUD kind of brings it to a head and brings it to top of mind but yeah I don't know I thought the baby shower was a good way to sort of have like a physical manifestation of all of this, and it just like it getting really weird. Like it's really weird. And I think it's sort of yeah, I don't know. Her friend like brings a date to it too and like treats it like it's this funny, like I think her friend is someone who really doesn't take things seriously in a way that Gina feels as though she's starting to take these things seriously. And it's almost like this gap between them is widening, and that's sort of what's happening there a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, even the date that she brings completely understandably says, "So when are you due?" Like, and then Annie laughs, right? But yeah, I mean, just that, as I was reading that scene, I was like, you imagine being that guy. Like, you're like, what the hell is going on? Like, I thought I was just, which is maybe it's not completely strange for men to come to a baby shower, but but to be like, what is this? I think that scene too, though, I mean, in a story sense, it's the catalyst, right? It's the thing that tips Gina to what she does at the end. Really visceral thing she does at the end. So I mean, it's I think your instincts were right too, in that we need something to ramp up there to tip this in, because what Gina does, like physically taking out her own IUD is so like extreme and dangerous and scary.
Mhm.
We need, for us to believe that she would do that, we need to witness this sort of scene before that. And I think that was um, I think that was done well. So I'm gonna come back to that scene in just a second, but I wanted you maybe you could talk about Gina's voice, like if you like how conscious were you of her voice, or is first person just kind of you know more natural, or is that like the default mode you write? And I'm just sort of curious about that.
Yeah, I think I can't remember if the story was ever in third person. I think I just because of the intimacy of the story, I felt like first really made sense for her to kind of talk about the creepiness of it all. Like even that scene like where she's getting the IUD installed, it's the flashback with Ian and the nurse like kind of is mean to her and like gives her weird looks, and the doctor is like she did well. Like I just felt like it added this, like I kind of wanted it to be birth like this story, and in a way it sort of is. And I just felt like the way in which you can kind of get inside Gina's head with that is sort of helpful with first person. I feel like she has this sort of, I wanted it to be like really assured, like the tone, like she has a lot of like this is right and this is wrong, and I don't know, this is creepy, and what is going on. And I feel like as a reader, like being in tune with that is really helpful with first person. And so I think that's sort of where it came from. I kind of liked the banter between her and her friend. Because again, I think when I first started writing this, it was a story I really wanted to have about friendship, but I think it kind of grew into more than that. I wouldn't necessarily say it's a friendship story now necessarily. I mean, it does incorporate friendship, but it went in a totally different direction, I think. So yeah, I think the first person kind of allowed me to let her breathe as a character and figure out like how this friendship would develop and what's going on with her relationship with Ian a little bit more than third person would have provided me with in writing it.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think that was the right choice. I mean, just because we're so close to her, and um, yeah, it feels like it's that good feeling in a story when you couldn't really imagine it another way.
Mhm.
I think that's the case here. So about this final scene, like, I mean, it is not even really the final scene. It's sort of the final image where, Annie goes into, I'm sorry, not Annie, Gina goes into the bathroom, and like, physically takes her IUD out. And like, I've read this story multiple times and it's still not, I don't mean to say that it's gross because it's dealing with, a woman's reproductive organs. Not that, it's just like so visceral and like, oh, it makes me almost kind of queasy.
Yeah.
But in like the best kind of way, right? It's like it's such a sensory overload scene. I mean, was this something that you were, I mean, we all operate differently, and every story is different. But I know some writers, myself included, will be working on a story and have a sort of a vision of the ending, and then I start sort of writing toward it, or I kind of set it aside and think like that might be where it goes. I'm sure I've had other stories or other writers where you begin with the final image. So I'm just curious, like where this final image came, how it came to be.
Yeah, I definitely played with the ending a lot. I think Um, I think she has a line about feeling like a piece of meat toward the end, where like I think she's sort of just become disembodied, and to her, this IUD represents like every kind of projection that she feels that her friends and loved ones are kind of putting onto her. And I just felt like the story had to end with her tearing it out. And I did Google it and it is possible. I can't say that it's the most medically accurate, but it does happen. So I mean, I just felt like her tearing it out was such a violent, like, way for her to just express, like, because she's so fed up and she kind of is very, like, she is a bit passive throughout the story. And so I really wanted her to kind of like freak out about this and like take her life into her own hands and whatever that means. And, I can't say that everything's going to be great after she removes the IUD and sticks it in the wastebasket or whatever. But I think that is like the most immediate way she feels she can sort of relieve this tension. And because I think she's like falsely putting the blame on this thing inside her. It's just a simple contraceptive device. But it did undergo like a bit of change. I think I have it in the wastebasket. Is that right? I have to take a look at that.
I believe so, yes.
And yeah, it's lying on there on top of some tissues. Like it never. Oh, and I think there's also this return to innocence for the IUD too, where she's almost like, oh, it's just like a sweet little IUD doing its job in a way. And I feel like it's kind of like this oh shit moment. So yeah, I always wanted her to remove it. Initially, like I'd had her leaving the bathroom and like walking outside and seeing the sunshine or something like that. But then I was just like, I don't know. I just feel like I'm always making these characters like take a look at some sunshine in the end, something like that. So I wanted her to kind of stay in there, and I don't know, really sit with it. So I felt like that visual of it on top of the wastebasket, that is one change that I did make that felt right. But I kind of always had this moment in mind, like throughout the revision process, like it was always removed in some way. Like I just felt it had, and even like in terms of like a parallel for birth, if this is a baby shower or what have you, thinking
Sure.
about it in that way too. Yeah, so that's sort of where that came from, I think. It was fun. I am I would say I'm kind of a queasy person, but for some reason while doing this, I was just like, yeah, like she's meat, like remove it. It's bloody.
Yeah, it's just such a visceral. I mean, and it bookends nicely, right? We don't get, the story opens with her on crouched on a toilet and it ends there. Um, and the opening bit is she's searching, she's like reaching inside of herself, searching for this thing. So it does bring us back, but obviously everything has changed, uh,
Yeah.
which is, has a nice balance to the story, or mirroring of the story that ending accomplishes. Um, yeah, it's just an incredibly visceral experience to read, which is like what we're after, right? That's what we should be seeking out art that does that to us.
Yeah.
Um, so what what were some writers or books that were sort of important for you starting out, or
Um,
and maybe remain important to you?
yeah, I think well, during this time, I think I wrote this 2022-ish. I had read Sheila Heti's How Should a Person Be around this time. And I think that she has a very visceral way of writing in first person as well that feels very intimate to her life. And I know she's considered autofiction, and I wouldn't say I would necessarily consider this piece autofiction, but I feel like I kind of wanted to pull from that for this. But so that was kind of directly related there. But yeah, starting out, I read Carmen Maria Machado's book of short stories in college. And that to me felt like a way of opening things up. I used to really like, you talked about the absurd element of the baby shower. And when I was really first in college and like exploring my voice as a writer, I think Amy Bender as well, like a lot of magical or not necessarily absurdism, felt really right for me at the time. And I think like as I've developed as a writer, I have learned that in my own writing, I tend to like almost head more toward the absurd, but I try and still keep it really grounded in reality. And I feel like Amy Bender specifically has kind of inspired that element of my writing. But then I also feel as though like these more visceral elements too, and like personal, I really like the feeling of like writing that feels very personal, and feeling like this first person, like it is very intimate. And I feel like Sheila Heti really did that for me. And I also had read Mary Gaitskill's Bad Behavior sometime around when I wrote this, and that has a lot to do with sexuality in a way that really interested me. And I think I was just thinking about a lot of these questions, and wanting this piece to kind of go off the rails, but then to also feel real and more realistic and grounded in realism, but like it like just sort of toes that line. So yeah, I think those are some authors that have definitely played into my development as a writer.
Yeah, that makes sense. The gate skill makes sense because this story, your story, doesn't turn away, right? When it could have. Another writer might have even if everything happens the way it happens in your version, the writer might have kind of turned away at the end. And
Yeah.
like gate skill is somebody who doesn't turn away, I think. Like, and we're
Yeah.
often made uncomfortable in her stories. And I think too, mentioning like Amy Bender and the absurd, or the borderline absurd, I think an argument can be made that you know we live in incredibly strange times, right? And maybe and things like reproductive rights, maybe we have the absurdity is the only way to make it make sense, right? I mean, there's I don't know. I think there's an argument to be made about that, like Machado and Bender both, that this is like, you know, they write this way because it's the only way to get at what it feels like to be alive, particularly to be a woman and be alive in 2025.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah, I think that the character is definitely experiencing a lot of those things. And I was just thinking too about the ending and like when she removes the IUD, I was thinking it's like a real, I think it's the only way in which she can kind of see her situation for what it is to like remove this thing and to kind of remove all of these like outside pressure, like all of these pressures are kind of distilled into this device, which she like projects onto it. So yeah, I think you're definitely getting at something there.
so what are some other writers that we should be reading? I mean, you mentioned a couple here that I think it's, but who else are you reading or are you interested in? Or maybe a writer that goes a little unsung.
Yes. I'm just doing a quick Google search so I can confirm this. Okay, so I would say so recently I've read a lot of Joy Williams, and I just read The Quick and the Dead, and she's just I'm not sure that she's necessarily unsung, but she is one of my favorite writers ever, and I just am I think that she has a way, and this is like when I think about what I admire about writing, I think it's what you were saying about that sort of not shying away from like certain visceral acts. And I think that she has a way of really throwing these things on the page and just making you sit with them and then quickly moving on to a new subject. And it's like, what the hell was that? Like, I think that is like writing that I can't get enough of it. So yeah, The Quick and the Dead was a really stunning novel, just about um three girls kind of grappling with death and living out in the desert. And it was kind of, I don't know, I think I read it after I wrote this story, but just like thinking about like the desert, she depicts it as someplace like you're kind of almost not meant to live. And it was just like very fascinating. I'm not familiar with the desert in any way. I'm an East Coast person, but it was really stunning to me. And I also recently read Nell Zink's The Wall Creeper. And this was also a book that really interested in me just in terms of like, um, I really like novels with women authors who kind of just like have these raw emotional feelings that they just sort of throw on the page and don't explain away at you. And I was really impressed by the way this character, and again, like really surprising things happen in this book, like between the two characters, like, or, like if you're talking about like life or death or like visceral acts. And I like when a author just kind of throws these things at you and they just happen, and I feel like they're not like like over explained in a way. And that's what I really admire about different writers. I think one other author I read recently, a lot of women authors, but one more is Magda Szabo. She is a Hungarian author who wrote The Door. And that was kind of about this cool, almost like very intimate relationship between a woman who's a writer and her longtime servant, when they kind of have this like deep psychological tension that comes to a head throughout the book. And they're both very weird characters. So I think, very visceral writing, very like weird kind of like people with like a lot of like, or not weird, but like with compelling like quirks and things like that. I'm drawn to a lot of books like that, I think, is what I've come to realize.
Cool. Um, so, do you mind telling us what you're working on now?
Yeah, so I received funding from when I was still in grad school, uh, as a TA. I received funding to research a novel in progress, which is still a novel in progress. And it's kind of I'm thinking about how to incorporate, it's very much in progress, but I'm thinking about sort of how to incorporate these experiences that I have and thinking about like kind of autofiction in that way, but moving, like using that to, I mean, fiction writers just do that, use your own experiences to inform your writing, of course. But so it's about a character who goes to Ireland to uncover kind of a family secret. And while she's there, she uncovers that her great grandfather had a secret child while he was there, and kind of like meeting up with family members of this child and wanting to connect and kind of having these missed connections, and kind of things go off the rails in Ireland, and she's thinking about getting married and it's just all going kind of wrong. So that's sort of where I'm at now. But it was really cool because I got to use this funding to go to Ireland and do some neat research while there.
Oh, it's
And
always nice when you can swing that, right? To have a really cool trip that's funded by research. That's really cool.
yes, yeah, it was definitely very informative for the novel.
Um, all right, well, very cool. Um, and we can also find more of your work. Are you still writing stories, I assume, too, or still? Okay, good. And we can find work in The Pinch, which is a great journal, and so Cimarron Review, and of course in Forthcoming and SIR. Um, you can, speaking of that, you can find Intrauterine in the spring 2025 issue of SIR. You can go to usi.edu / SIR to find out how to get a copy. And of course, the link will be in the description below. Thank you so much again, Alex, for taking the time to talk to us today.
Thanks, Casey. Yeah, it was really fun to talk with you. I'm really looking forward to seeing the piece in SIR.
All right, great. Well, thank you all, and we'll see you on the next one.